There still are some cookies in the back. So there's cookies and coffee. Go get some cookies and coffee. We'll get started in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, no, I told him.
This countdown clock here will tell you exactly when this is supposed to start, so making this very official. Thank you all for coming out. It's kind of like NASA. We're just like waiting with the clock counting down. Here, pick up your microphone. Let's test the microphone, make sure this works.
10-9-8-7-6-5-4-3-2-1.
Excellent. Perfect.
Yeah, NASA's had a few blunders recently. Hopefully it's not too much like NASA.
I was not too much like NASA. Yeah.
SpaceX.
Well, SpaceX.
They caught a rocket component, like a wide receiver the other day.
Yeah, they're pretty good at that. They've done a good job with that stuff. You know. As I said before, Senator Blumenthal is running just a couple minutes late, but he should be here between 1 and 3 minutes, which is interesting because I've done radio for a long time, and if you tell somebody on the radio, it can happen in like a minute or 3 minutes, it makes us very crazy because that's a long time in radio, a minute and 3 minutes, but he should be here soon is I guess the point. So we'll get started with our live stream in just a couple minutes, and I'll introduce you to a fabulous first guest that I have before the senator gets here.
Keeping the seat warm.
I also like that people actually went up and got the cookies. Yeah, for those of you who just are late arrivers, there are cookies in the back. Get a cookie and get some coffee. Here we go. I would like to welcome you to In the Room. It's our monthly series of in-person conversations with Connecticut political leaders. I'm John Dankosky of the Connecticut Mirror. I'd like to thank the people who sponsor these events, this entire series. I'd like to thank the Mohegan Tribe, Connecticut Business and Industry Association, Eversource, Clifton Larson Allen, the Causeway Agency, Express Strategies, Hinckley, Allen, and Rowthorne Law. So before we start our Q&A, those of you who are here in our audience at UConn Stamford campus, you've got a card that you got when you walked in. If you scan the QR code, you can sign up for the Mirror newsletter, and you can also make a gift to the Connecticut Mirror. We make admission to these events free, so when you make a donation, you can help us support more events like this in the future. I'm joined right now by Bruce Butterman, who's the publisher of the Connecticut Mirror. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, for being a few minutes late.
Yes, we're waiting for Senator Richard Blumenthal. He will be here in just a couple of minutes, but we're in Stamford today, Bruce's hometown. Bruce, you've been a publisher of the Connecticut Mirror for how long now?
7 years, a little more than 7 years.
7 years, and it's actually been a period of kind of unbelievable growth. I was part of the Friends board that helped to start the Mirror years and years ago, but in the last 7 years you've grown a lot. Can you just give the audience just an idea of the scope of growth in terms of journalists?
Sure. In 2019, we had 8 journalists and me. As publisher, I'm the business side of the organization, so everything but the journalism. So 2019 was kind of a turning point year for us, and we just kind of struck it rich, I guess, in terms of being able to raise some money to be able to hire more and more journalists, and then building out a business team to try to sustain that level of staffing amongst the journalists. And so today, in 2024, we'll probably, we are 22 full-time people right now. We have 4 new positions that we're hiring for. Back in 2019, we were about a $1.3 million organization, and this year we're going to be about a $3 million organization.
Okay, so one thing I'll say though is I think in the world of nonprofit journalism, saying to people, we struck it rich, sometimes it's like, well, okay, well, I don't need any money anymore. We don't need to worry about this. How exactly does it work when we're talking about supporting nonprofit journalism? It's not like you got a big pile of money and like, okay, we'll just hire as many people as we want. Don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right. What people sometimes don't understand about nonprofit, anything nonprofit is just a tax status. We still have to raise more money every year than we spend. That's the same for nonprofits, for-profits. Theoretically, the public sector, most certain branches of the public sector don't necessarily operate that way. And so, yes, we always are out trying to raise money like any organization that feels like it's doing really important mission work. We want to bring more of that work to more people and in more ways and meeting more needs. And so, yes, that takes kind of ever increasing amounts of money.
I was going to ask, we're here in Stamford, as I said before, this is your hometown, and the Connecticut Mirror covers the entire state. We're here because we're trying to take this series in the room out to the places, essentially, where the politicians we're talking to are from. Richard Blumenthal is a Fairfield County guy, so we're back here in Fairfield County. The Connecticut Mirror started as kind of a Hartford institution with some folks from the shoreline who were behind it, but it was really centered in the capital and covering the capital and trying to cover the entire state, and having people know about the Connecticut Mirror in the entire state has been a big part of what you've been trying to do over the course of the last 7 years.
Yeah, it has been. Having grown up down here, having lived my whole adult life in West Hartford, I appreciate the kind of bifurcated nature of Connecticut, that Fairfield County is in the New York media market, doesn't feel any less sense of kind of belonging to to Connecticut. I used to always joke that, when you went to renew your driver's license, you knew you lived in Connecticut, but otherwise, and then in 1990 when you paid your income taxes. So yes, the old joke in the early days of the Mirror was the target audience was 06106, which is the zip code of the capital, or maybe it's 105. In any event, I botched the joke. But today, I would say our target audience is 06, the entire state of Connecticut. And we've worked hard to tell stories about public policy and government using illustrations from people all around the state, from towns all around the state, from organizations, community groups from all around the state. And as a result, we're at a point now where, yes, a plurality of our audience is still in Hartford County, about 35%, but about 20% in New Haven County, 20% in Fairfield County, and then the other 25% in the other 5, less populated counties. We have a number of donors in Fairfield County who do appreciate their connection to the state of Connecticut. I do think a turning point in terms of Fairfield County tuning into the Mirror was during the budget crisis of 2017. Some of you may remember that. Connecticut was the last state in the country to adopt a budget that year on Halloween. And everybody around the state was constantly tuning into us and other news organizations to find out, what's going on up there? When are we gonna have a budget? When are we gonna know what our taxes are gonna look like? And I think I'm seeing a thumbs up that Senator Blumenthal is in the room, or at least in the building.
He's in the building, but he's not, Bruce, he's not here on stage with us yet.
All right.
I mean,
we'll keep going.
I think we'll keep going at least until he actually gets here. And one of the things we're going to talk to him about, and I don't think I'll be giving away any big surprises, he's supported a free and open press. And I'll say, this is important, Bruce, when we talk about the Mirror growing to 22 journalists, that's in stark opposition to what's happening with newspapers around the country. Just say something quickly about that.
In the mid-2000s, newspapers began to precipitously contract all around the country. There's a number of reasons for that. We won't get into it now. Many new nonprofit news organizations around the country, including the Connecticut Mirror, were founded in response to that contraction of commercial news organizations, and particularly the significant reduction or almost total elimination of capital press corps, people covering what happens in state houses. It's said about people who serve in state government, their greatest advantage is that no one is paying attention to them. And the Connecticut Mirror was formed to pay attention to state government because some would argue state government has more impact on your lives than the federal government or local government. And so we filled a void that kind of emerged as it did all around the country at that time.
Because as we know, a lot more happens at the state capitol in Hartford that affects your life than what happens then in Washington with those senators and Congress people. Well, we're going to bring up one of them. Bruce Putterman, the publisher of the Connecticut Mirror, thank you very much. I'll have you hand off the microphone to Senator Blumenthal. And once again, we have some questions that are already here from our audience, people who take part in the Connecticut Mirror. Send us in some questions in advance. You can take part in future events like this if you'd like. Senator Blumenthal, welcome. Good to see you. Yeah, it's been a while. Thank you. Please have a seat. Grab that microphone. Where are you coming from just now?
Where am I coming from?
Yeah, where are you coming from?
I have a right to remain silent. I am coming from Bridgeport via Cheshire, via Hartford. Where was I before that? I've been all around the state. But I've been in Connecticut.
You've been in Connecticut. This is a regular kind of day for you. I mean, take us through a day like this when you're giving press conferences, you're meeting with constituents, you're on the road. You probably don't even know which town you're in right now. Talk about what that day is like for you most days.
Most days I am moving around. I actually did several wonderful ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings today. One of them, a ribbon cutting, or I should say an award, an announcement of $640,000 to renovate the senior citizen and disability housing in Simsbury, Connecticut. I did a press conference on Medicare Advantage. My subcommittee, it's called the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, has done a report on Medicare Advantage, which perhaps we'll cover in detail, but basically showing that it's really buyer beware if you're thinking about Medicare Advantage, because the denial rate on pre-authorization, if you are coming out of surgery or a hospital for some other reason, you need skilled nursing care, long-term acute, post-acute hospitalization, or rehabilitation, the chances are better and better. The care will be denied by your insurer under Medicare Advantage. United Healthcare, Humana, and CVS. They're the major ones. So before you sign up, we're in the open enrollment period for healthcare access in Connecticut. You should read my report. It's only 54 pages. It's quite dense, but you'll get the gist of it in the first 2 pages of findings, which say, in effect, buyer beware. Because in recent years, the denial rate for coverage has risen astronomically by 50%, 100%. Denial rate in just a couple of years has risen astronomically. I'm trying to get that word out. So then I went to a company called Rebellion to do a podcast on AI, artificial intelligence, another topic that maybe we'll cover. This podcast lasted about half an hour, which made me late to the next event. I was pretty angry, which was the ribbon cutting at the Wakeman Boys and Girls Club for the ASML new room, the Boys Club in Bridgeport. They're sponsoring, they've just opened a training facility for young men and women, teenagers, to do tech. Now, when I grew up, and I was on the board of the Boys and Girls Club here in Stamford for a while. Boys and Girls Clubs, by the way, are great institutions. I don't know how many of you have been club kids, but they are just the best. When I was growing up, though, it was basketball, right? Just basketball. That's what they had, basketball and maybe some other sports. Now it's all kinds of activities. And this tech facility, which is sponsored by ASML, great worldwide company, they make chips and other electronics. They're adding employees in Connecticut. They're based here now, their American operations. And they've just sponsored opening this new room. It's really a new facility. And they're, by now I've bored you to death. So that's a part of my day. And you can tell why I love my job, right? Well, and then I get to come here on my way up to the Glenville Firehouse annual dinner. That's where I'm going
Oh,
at,
that's where you're going next. So you got another thing.
to honor a very good friend. Some of you may know him, Bill Nickerson, who was a state senator
I do. Yeah.
from Greenwich. I see a couple of heads nodding.
Yeah.
A great friend, Republican, by the way. But we got along famously because he was what I regard as a true Republican, not what we have now. I don't want to be too partisan now. We're close to the election, and I've been told you want to stay,
but
pretty nonpartisan.
But as I listen to that, okay, so a couple things. You touched on a couple things that I want to get to with you. One of them is, when I'm done with this, here's what I've been doing. I drove down from Winstead to Hartford. I spent some time in Hartford. I spent some time at a coffee shop writing some questions for you. I came here. I'm already tired. I'm going to drive back to Winstead afterward. You've done like 35 things. You are 23 years older than I am. Okay. I guess my first question is, how do you do all those things? And at a certain point, do you ever think, I should slow down and maybe not do 17 events in one day?
I sometimes think about whether I want to do that last event, and then I realize that last event is really going to be fun, and it will mean something to someone. And, people come up to me and they say, I'm so glad to see you again. You came to this event or that one, but it also is fun to do. And everywhere I go, John, I want to tell you something. I learn because I listen. At every one of those events, I learn something. Mm-hmm. So, I'm a lawyer. I was a Supreme Court law clerk. I was U.S. attorney. I was attorney general. I know how to write briefs and study and all that. I know how to read books, and I read 5 newspapers every day. But the most meaningful stuff I learn is by listening. And I think that's probably the most important part of my job. I have this adage, and you've all heard it: God gave us 2 lips and 1 ear, so that you do more listening than talking. Two ears and 1 mouth.
Yeah.
You can tell it's the end of the day.
I was going to say, I was trying to do the math there with you.
I knew I was getting something. But here's the thing. One of my opponents once said, Blumenthal, the saying about Blumenthal is, he'll go to everything.
A garage door opening.
If you have a garage door opening,
yes.
He'll be there.
Yeah.
And he felt like this was the ultimate put down. And I said, that's right.
But
it's a badge of honor.
I had that joke because that's what we say at the press corps, right? I've been covering you since the early 1990s, and this is something we said. At a certain point, I think in a political career, any career, you have to determine what sort of person you're going to be, right? And so, yes, I do see you sometimes on CNN shows or on a Sunday talk show. But there are some people who are in the Senate who, that's what they live for. They want to do that thing, one of the 4 talking heads in a box. You've always been the guy who just goes to a whole bunch of small events, and you show up at all these things. At what point in your career did you decide that's the sort of politician I'm going to be, as opposed to trying to be the other one? Was it a conscious decision? I mean, how did you arrive at this particular way of working?
I started out as a state representative, and I was not a natural politician. I'm still not a natural politician, by the way. I really have to work at being a nice person. Just talk to my wife. But seriously, I just decided that was the job as a state representative on the west side of Stamford. Because when I started out, I knew very few people. And I began knocking on doors in a special election. I knocked on, I think, close to every door in the district. I walked through a snowstorm because the special election, as I recall, it was in February. And then I stood outside the polls on election day, and people would come up to me. I was their best friend because I had knocked on their door. And now, of course, it's standard operating procedure, but I found that I really loved talking to people and seeing their lives and learning about them. And that's just the way I've always done this job. And I get my share of CNN and MSNBC and even Fox.
Yeah.
I go on Fox, especially with my Republican friends. I have Republican friends, and I work with them, like Marsha Blackburn, on the Kids Online Safety Act. I really hope we'll cover the Kids Online Safety Act. And I just came back from the Middle East. I was in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. I hope we'll cover that topic as well. So I've sort of broadened my horizons a little bit beyond the west side of Stamford. But Stamford's my hometown, and Connecticut is my home. I come back every weekend unless I'm traveling, someplace like Normandy. I went to the 80th anniversary of D-Day, profoundly moving experience. This job has opened new vistas for me, but I still believe the job is to be there as often everywhere that I can be where I'm invited. Yeah. And a lot of times when I'm not invited.
Well, I want to dig into all those things that you just talked about in a little bit more depth in a minute. I talked with your colleague, Chris Murphy, in one of these conversations about this. How do you arrive at the topics that you are going to take on? If you're talking about seniors in healthcare, if you're talking about AI, if you're talking about online problems for kids, if you're talking about the Middle East, how do you and your staff sit down and say, okay, here are the things that are going to be Dick Blumenthal issues that I'm going to own, and here are, because that means there are other things that you won't spend as much time on. So how do you choose those things that you care about?
Well, some of it is intellectual interest. I have a long-standing interest in the law. That's my training. I'm on the Judiciary Committee. So issues like Supreme Court nominations or Supreme Court ethics or court practices like the shadow docket, where I've led the Code of Ethics for the Supreme Court nominations. I've been pretty staunchly opposed to the last three, I should say the three before Justice Brown Jackson. And then I'm on the Armed Services Committee. Two of my sons have served, Matthew in the Marine Corps, Michael as a Navy SEAL. I served in the Marine Corps Reserve, but I'm also very interested in our national defense. I believe in a secure America and maintaining our security through strong defense. So I've taken a very active interest in those military issues, but in veterans issues, leading on the PAC Act, protecting and making sure that our veterans who suffer from the toxic effects of burn pits or chemicals on the battlefield or simply in training or where they're stationed, those chemicals that cause cancer, the PAC Act protects our veterans, gives them the care and benefits they need. Veteran suicide, heartbreaking for me. I meet people, as I've met veterans who have suffered from Agent Orange out of the Vietnam era, or more recently, the burn pits in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then, Ukraine. I've led on Ukraine. I'm really proud to have worked just most recently the Stand With Ukraine Act. And we have a bipartisan coalition. You can see from my pen, this is a passion for me. I've been to Ukraine 6 times in the last 2.5 years. Yeah. And by the way, to get to Ukraine, you know how you get to Ukraine these days, to Kyiv? Well, first you fly to Frankfurt or Krakow or one of the other major cities. Then you take a flight to Cheshire, which is on the border. And then you take a 12-hour overnight train to Kyiv. 12 hours on a train By the way, it's not like Amtrak.
Yeah.
It's like out of the 60s or 70s. And I've been many times with Lindsey Graham. All of these trips have been bipartisan, every single one of them to Ukraine, as I recall. And to get to know the people of Ukraine and to fight for them, advocate their cause, it is one of the real inspirations of this job. So
Yeah.
that's both an emotional and an intellectual commitment. Let me just tell you that it's not just blind emotion. I truly believe that Putin will keep going against a NATO ally if he's not stopped in Ukraine. And we will have boots on the ground. American boys and girls, men and women, will be there unless we stop Putin. And the Ukrainians are fighting our fight. We should give them what they need.
But what they're asking for specifically right now is to become a part of NATO. And do you support that?
I strongly support giving them the security of becoming a NATO ally. And here's why. I think that will, in effect, enable successful negotiations toward peace, because it will stop Putin. If there's simply a ceasefire now or an end to the fighting, Putin will come back again. That's the history here. You know, he invaded in 2014. He's invaded again because he sees Ukraine as part of Russia. Actually, what he wants to recreate is the old Soviet Union. And that is his abiding lust. So what we need is a guarantee of security. The way to do it is through a NATO alliance.
Okay, so they're part of a NATO alliance. I think one of the things that holds back many American politicians, and certainly those in Europe, is just a fear that what that does is it provokes Vladimir Putin, and essentially means that the United States then has to join a war against Russia, because that's the point of being part of NATO, right? If you strike one, you strike us all. And so therefore, the United States and the other NATO allies would have to then defend Ukraine.
And that's exactly what will happen if we lose Ukraine, because he will keep going. Why do you think Finland and Sweden have decided to join the NATO alliance? We allowed NATO alliances for Finland and Sweden. They're directly on his border. They've been invaded. Talk to the Prime Minister of Estonia, what it's like to be a country on Russia's border and have been invaded. Her family was sent to Siberia when Russia took over. So Russia has to be deterred. And I agree with you, we don't want a war with Russia, but let me tell you something, even more so, Russia doesn't want a war with us. And I give a lot of credit to President Biden. He's done the right thing in Ukraine. He's just done it later than I advocated that it be done. I advocated that we give them artillery, the Stryker and Bradley vehicles. I advocated that we give them Abrams tanks. I advocated that we give him permission to strike into Russian territory. I advocated that we give them the F-16s and the Abrams tanks. Now I'm advocating that we give them permission to strike even deeper into Russia. He's done all the right things, just a little bit late.
And when you say strike deeper into Russia, you mean with long-range missiles that have been provided to Ukraine that would essentially touch Russian territory?
Well, he is using armaments now to strike Russian territory, but not beyond a certain distance into Russia. And the fear has been, apprehension on the part of the Biden administration, that Putin would, quote unquote, escalate, or that he would use tactical nuclear weapons. Well, he knows if he uses tactical nuclear weapons, NATO comes back at him. He doesn't want a war with NATO. And the idea that he will somehow escalate, well, he's escalated. I mean, he is now striking civilian targets, hospitals, energy facilities, schools, homes, purposely targeting them, kidnapping kids. He has escalated the conflict. And if he were going to use nuclear weapons, he would have done it when Ukraine invaded. In effect, it's called an incursion, not an invasion. When they went into Russian territory, they've gone into the Kursk region, as you know, enormous boost to morale and substantial potential drain on Russian forces. So Ukraine is in this fight, but on the eastern and southern fronts, they need more support. And if we make the investment now, we can not only enable them to win, meaning give them a stronger place at the bargaining table. There will have to be negotiations at some point. The only question is, what will Ukraine be able to accomplish before then?
Let's move to another very important piece of international news that we just found out today: the death of Hamas.
Did I convince you on Ukraine?
Yeah, you need to convince this.
I need to convince.
You didn't
them.
need to convince this particular Ukrainian American journalist about anything. Hamas's top leader Yahya Sinwar, it was confirmed today, was killed in military action. What do you think this means for the possibility of an end to the war in Gaza and a return of the hostages there?
I've just come back from a trip literally last Friday morning to the region. I went to Israel, well, first to Jordan, then to Israel for a day and a half, met with the prime minister, defense minister, foreign minister, a number of others, and then to Saudi Arabia, where I met with MBS, the crown prince, the ruler of Saudi Arabia, and then to UAE, where I met with the heads of state, Abu Dhabi. And Sinwar's death offers us both justice and hope. Justice for the victims and loved ones, including Americans, whose torture and killing Sinwar masterminded. He is the architect of the October 7th, how to characterize it in a word, savage atrocity. And it also offers hope that there is a path toward cessation of fighting, return to the hostages, a path toward normalization of relation, as well as humanitarian aid. There has to be more of it, and healing. And the trip to the Middle East and my conversations with leaders in those countries, UAE and Saudi Arabia, gives me hope that there is a way toward negotiations, not just leading to a ceasefire, but also an expansion of the Abraham Accords, which, as you know, involved Israel and UAE and other countries in the region. If those accords and that kind of normalization can be expanded as a result of this death, and perhaps then a ceasefire and return to the hostages, there's a real hope that peace and stability can come to the region. I think.
Yeah. Well, your Senate colleague Chris Murphy has said that for Prime Minister Netanyahu, this is a quote here. He said, "There's political upside in not signing a ceasefire." And not to put words in the senator's mouth, but essentially, he seems to be saying, and other people agree with him, that it's not in Netanyahu's best interest to sign a ceasefire agreement because this is how he maintains political control in Israel. You've met with the man very recently. Is Chris Murphy right about that?
Well, I've met with him several times. I've been to Israel 3 times since October 7th. And I've urged the importance of reaching a ceasefire that will enable a return of the hostages, which has to be a priority. I've come to know and admire and love some of the hostages' families. In my most recent trip, I met with Rachel and John Poland, who lost their son Hirsch. You may recall they spoke at the Democratic Convention. Wonderful, beautiful human beings. And I think they're gratified that Sinwar's death may lead to a ceasefire and return of the other hostages. and their remains. I happen to think Netanyahu has a potential for historic legacy here if he can make peace, a peace that guarantees Israel's security. And he knows, and I have urged, along with my colleague Lindsey Graham, there has to be a day after. Israel has to win the peace, not just win the war. And there is an opportunity now for him to pivot in a way that advantages him politically. But it also can potentially leave him with a legacy that is historic.
I think that there are many.
And I just want to add,
sure.
I haven't seen Senator Murphy's statement, so I don't want you to conclude necessarily that I'm disagreeing with him.
Certainly.
Because I haven't talked to him, and I'm not sure what exactly he has said.
Sure.
But I wouldn't presume that he will say no to a cessation of fighting automatically if there's a real opportunity for Israel's security to be guaranteed and for return to the hostages and other objectives that Israel has in the fighting. And remember, he has to consider not only his political interests, but also the military position that he has right now. At what point had the generals said, we've accomplished our objectives, we've guaranteed our security? Maybe Sinwar's death enables them to come closer to that goal.
As you talk about Netanyahu's legacy, I think there are many of your constituents, certainly, that you've heard from who would say part of that legacy is the deaths of some 40,000 people in Gaza. Do you believe that that response was disproportionate to what happened on October 7th?
You know, I've urged, again, when I've met with the Prime Minister, that the numbers of civilian casualties be reduced as much as possible. And, you know, war is always tragic, and this one especially so. I've been heartbroken by the pictures, as all of you have, I'm sure. I was also sickened and heartbroken by the pictures I saw of October 7th. I'll never forget my first meeting with the Israeli War Cabinet within a few weeks of October 7th. And those videos, you may have seen them by now, but no one had when I first saw them, showed the pictures that the terrorists took. They were proud. They wanted to send them around the world to boast of what they had done. And I sat for 20 minutes in the Prime Minister's cabinet room watching these pictures. And I think they changed my perception. They certainly have changed Israel's perception of their position in the region and the need to guarantee their security. I've talked to the generals and military leaders about these tactics. And, you know, as I avoid labels for, you know, conservative, liberal, I think they have less meaning these days. Proportionate is a term that I would avoid trying to apply in any sort of blanket way. I think that every one of the deaths of those children and innocent civilians is a tragedy that we'll all have to live with.
I guess just a last point on this to the question of whether or not proportionate is the correct word or not. That was a lot of tragedy, and I guess the question is, was the scale of that tragedy the right type of response for the tragedy that happened to the people of Israel? Was that the correct response?
If you're asking me, should every one of those 2,000 pound bombs have been used in every single instance they were used? Probably not. There's no question over a year's worth of time, there were mistakes, inadvertent, maybe innocent, in quotes, mistake. But I'm not here to try to second guess every single decision that was made.
Sure.
Israel had to defend itself.
Yeah. I
It
think,
has a
yeah.
right. Let me just finish, John.
Of course, certainly.
It has a right and responsibility to defend itself.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've learned a little bit, maybe not as much as some of you, but I've learned a little bit about past wars in the course of serving on the Armed Services Committee, as well as reading a lot about it. There's never been a war like this one, where the enemy essentially was underground. And it wasn't just in, you know, a tunnel. It was in miles and miles of fortified tunnels deep underneath the ground with hostages.
Yeah.
The defense of Israel required some response. Yeah. And this very novel and unusual situation proved extraordinarily difficult in human terms. So
certainly, yeah. I take your point. Many of the questions that we've gotten throughout the course of the series, for Chris Murphy, for you, for others, they deal with the fact that, in part, Americans paid for the 2,000-pound bombs with our tax dollars. And that's what many people, I can paraphrase many of the questions that I got for you tonight. It comes down to that. It's that with so many needs at home, with so many things that don't work here in the United States, why would my hard-earned tax dollars go to pay for a 2,000-pound bomb dropped perhaps in the wrong place on the heads of children? That's a question that I get asked a lot to ask folks like you. And that's, I think, where a lot of that comes from.
Well, it's the same question that people are now asking about Ukraine. Why are my tax dollars going to help Ukraine? Why are my tax dollars going to help NATO? Let NATO do it. A certain candidate for higher office has said, we don't need NATO anymore. American involvement around the world involves helping them to defend themselves, not just with 2,000-pound bombs, but with F-16s and with F-35s, which we're in effect selling, but we're subsidizing to allies. And it's a hard truth about our world that we have roads and bridges and need for education and healthcare at home, and we are still the bulwark of democracy. Now, I believe that in the Middle East, there's a potential for diplomacy, and that diplomacy at this point should be given a chance. We have to continue to enable Israel to defend itself, but I think that those decisions by military people on the battlefield are difficult to second guess.
So, as you said, you just traveled to the Middle East with Lindsey Graham, who is, as we know, one of the most prominent Republican supporters of that politician for higher office who shall not be named by you just now. So when you're traveling, you're on a long plane ride or a long, train ride to Kyiv with Lindsey Graham. Y'all ever talk about that? About the fact that, he supports this guy and you don't? Does that ever come up?
Not really.
Really?
I mean, what would we say to each other?
Well, no, but that's what I want to know.
Where each of us stands. He knows what I've said publicly. I know what he's said publicly. But
I'll bet he says some different things privately.
People will sometimes ask, that's kind of an odd combination, isn't it? But when we get into a room with President Zelensky or with MBS or with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the force of our advocacy is all the greater because of those differences and because we've come together, Republican and Democrat, across such a wide divide. And by the way, I also worked with Lindsey Graham on red flag statutes to prevent gun violence. Those are the statutes that enable judges to separate people from their guns if they say they're going to kill themselves or someone else. Mm-hmm. And they're now part of the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, provision on red flag statutes. We've worked together on a variety of other topics. I work with Marsha Blackburn on the Kids Online Safety Act, which is designed to help give kids and parents their online lives back, protect them against the toxic content that are driven at them by social media, big tech companies. If you took her quotes and my quotes about social media, about the need to hold them accountable with a duty of care, to give parents the tools they need to protect their kids, to require more transparency, as our Kids Online Safety Act would do, you wouldn't know which one of us had said it. And that's the reason that the Kids Online Safety Act passed the Senate by a 91-3 vote. 91-3. That doesn't happen these days in the United States Senate, as you know. And the reason is that we're willing to put aside those differences. And you probably have read a bit about what she said, and her supporters have read what I've said, and they're all wondering, how could you do it? But that's the way our democracy has to work. That's compromise.
But that's yes, that's the way it's supposed to work. I think, and I hear these stories about senators working together. I hear these stories about attorneys general, as used to, working together across state lines from different parties. I think, though, you see this as you go around Connecticut and around the country, in America today, it's almost easier for you to get together with a Republican senator than for many Americans who live right across the street from each other. One has Harris signs, one has Trump signs, to talk through these issues. What is it that you're able to do when you're working on policy together that so many of us can't right now, in terms of being able to talk this stuff through, work together to come to some sort of compromise?
Well, you have to accept that you're not going to agree about everything in order to reach a constructive agreement about some things that have to be bipartisan. But the issue that you have focused on is a more fundamental and deeper one, which is, how do we bring America back together? And I suspect everyone here is worried, as I am, about the America we see today that is so riven by the emotional differences. And it has given rise to the phenomenon of violent extremism in this country. And when I say violent, I really mean lethal extremism. That's what we saw on January 6th. And what bothers me about the deniers is, not a disagreement intellectually, but the idea that resort to violence is okay, that's the way to settle differences. And it's the same phenomenon that we find in neighborhoods and communities. You all know there used to be fights. People would come home with a black eye. Now they're killed with guns. And community violence intervention has become a major passion of mine, providing the funds for outreach by young people themselves so that guns and other fatal instruments of fighting are taken off the streets by the young people themselves. They have to intervene. They know who the troublemakers and the violent ones are, and whether they have guns. Because remember, guns, whether it's on the streets or for veterans, if we can have safe storage. Ethan's Law, we have it in Connecticut. It slows people down so they can call a counselor before they put the gun to their heads. These causes should be bipartisan, and we did pass the Safer Communities Act, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. I give a ton of credit to my colleague, Chris Murphy. So when I was Attorney General, I think you were alluding to it. I think you and I have talked about it. I went around the country. We sued the tobacco companies. We sued Microsoft. When I was working with attorneys general, to be honest with you, it shows how I'm not really a politician. I didn't know whether these guys were Republicans or Democrats. I didn't know whether these men or women were elected as Republicans or Democrats, because what we wanted to do was stop kids from smoking, stop the tobacco companies from recruiting and enticing them and lying. Tobacco companies said, don't worry, cigarettes don't cause cancer. Literally, you may not remember it, but that was their pitch. All a lie. Blumenthal lies. Cigarettes, harmless. So I've continued that fight on vaping, on chewing tobacco, on other smokeless products, because I believe they are public health problems, and I've tried to enlist bipartisan coalitions. It's the only way to get things done.
I know that you said, you didn't want to talk too much about partisan politics, and you don't, it's not too far from the election, so you don't want to do too much stuff. But I gather you're going to be at this event. Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate, is going to be in Greenwich this weekend. You're going to be there? I'm
going to be there.
You're going to be there. So I was thinking about you during the vice presidential debate. Maybe you know what I'm going to say, but there's a moment where Tim Walz he's asked about some time he spent in China. He'd obviously misspoken. He'd said something about his past that wasn't correct from a timeline perspective, and he got called out on national television in a debate. It seemed to fluster him, frankly. He didn't have a great answer to the question about where he was in China at this particular time. This issue of misspeaking is something you've had to deal with a bit in your political career. I guess I'm wondering if you felt something for Tim Walz in that moment.
I actually didn't recall that moment, but I'm sympathetic to anyone who inadvertently says something in a slip, because I'm willing to bet you every one of us, maybe you have too.
Oh God, thousands of times.
Who publicly is talking like I am just now, and I did it earlier, whatever I said about
lips and ears,
2 ears and 1 mouth.
Yes.
I forgot now what I said. But it's an occupational hazard. Joe Biden has done it.
Yes.
I think every president is called out at one point or another on it. So yes, I was sympathetic to him, and I don't think that's going to be a reason that anybody's going to vote for or against Kamala Harris, for president of the United States, or Donald Trump for that matter. It doesn't seem to hurt him at all when he purposely misspeaks.
Well, but that is kind of something interesting that's happened, that Trump has changed about the way that even we cover politics. Because when I was covering you as Attorney General, and I was relatively young in my career, you'd catch a politician saying one thing but doing something else, or doing one thing and saying something else. And we're like, aha, we have you. And now no one will ever possibly vote for that person because we've caught them in a lie or in an inconsistency. It doesn't even matter anymore. It's like it's something has changed about the way that people who do what you do, in large part, talk. They can just say whatever, and it doesn't seem to have the type of repercussions or consequences. Is that something that you've noticed over time as your career has moved on?
I have noticed it, and I was talking to one of the first selectmen yesterday, going over my schedule, I was in Southbury and Oxford to see how the FEMA relief, the SBA relief is going in the flood areas. Seymour, Oxford, Middlebury, they're Republican towns, but I have great relations with the local leaders there. I'm really proud of the fact that I do get around. I don't care whether it's a Republican town or a Democratic town in terms of its local leadership. I was talking to one of the Republicans who's been in office for some time, and he said, I remember, I'm so glad you're here. You've been great on this flood relief. This is really bipartisan. It's good to see that we can still do this kind of stuff. And I said, yeah, it's really changed a lot. He said, I'm not sure I'd get into it now. And the reason I think is that politics has been degraded to an extent. I still believe it's a really honorable calling. It's the art of the possible. My heroes in public office not only spoke what they believed, but they then did it. Abe Ribicoff, who was a mentor of mine, others in the Senate. That's not to say anyone's perfect, but I really think very, very hard about what I do and whether it's consistent with what I have said.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. We're going to go just a couple of minutes past 8 o'clock because we got started a little bit late. I hope that's okay. I know that you have another event. You've been in the Senate. I said no. What's that? Well, I mean, I bring Bruce Putterman from the Connecticut Mirror up here again for 5 more minutes.
I got plenty of time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's good. By the way, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a couple of years. You've been in the Senate now for 14 years?
Roughly.
This is your last term?
Not necessarily. No. I'll make a decision. I'm planning to run again.
Okay. So
I'm planning to run again. I love the job. I feel good.
Oh, we just mentioned President Biden. He's not running for president right now, in large part because he has been misspeaking a bit more. He was asked.
I'm knocking on wood because good health is always.
That's right.
You never want to presume anything.
You're
swimming and exercising.
But you're 78 years old. Is it pushing? And by the way, I will note that the two people in matching AARP jackets came in here, and I was worried about asking this question with them in the audience. Is it getting on too old to do the job at 78? Thank you. I appreciate that. But
I rest my case.
No, but do you think about that sometimes? Do you think sometimes that the average age of the U.S. Senator being the retirement age of most Americans, around 64, 65, is perhaps past the point at which you should be doing this for 14 years? Give somebody else a chance.
There are always issues about whether someone should stay in a job for too long, or for another term, or, but there's also a record of senators or people in public office being more effective, especially in an institution like the Senate, where seniority really counts. I know you've heard that argument, but it is true, believe me. As much as I wish it weren't true, because I came to the Senate at an older age than many of my contemporaries there, but seniority really counts. I'm chairman now of 2 subcommittees, and I can do things for Connecticut in terms of grants and bringing back funding, that Simsbury housing project, the ribbon cuttings that I did just today, the fire equipment for Middlefield that we announced yesterday, for West Haven, same day. I know it sounds a little bit maybe trite, but that kind of support really matters to a fire department, to a housing authority, to a town. The flood relief that we got, the major disaster declaration, because we worked together as a team. I'm not taking credit for it. We're a great delegation because we work together and we fight above our weight. We're a small delegation, but as we say, we fight above our weight. I would stop doing this job if I felt I weren't doing it to my standard, which is a pretty high standard.
Do you feel like you're getting better at it in some ways? Because I've heard from, I've talked to musicians, for instance, who play until they're in their 90s, and they say they don't want to stop playing because they feel like they're just starting to get good. I mean, do you actually feel like there's parts of your job that you're getting better at, as other parts clearly are going to have to slow down at a certain point?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Because in fact, I do feel I'm better at this job than I was 14 years ago, for sure. I'm so much more comfortable talking on the floor of the Senate. I'm so much more comfortable traveling to the Middle East or to Ukraine or to Munich or talking to, a world leader. I'm more comfortable telling the President of the United States, Mr. President, I disagree with you, with all respect. I have a lot more confidence in dealing with my colleagues. I'm no longer intimidated by a leader, a chairman. And
you've never struck me as someone who would be intimidated to go up to someone and say, I don't agree with you. It's actually striking that you're saying that to me. That's not something that I would have thought.
I wouldn't have been intimidated to the point of not doing it, but I said I'm more comfortable doing it. As I grew in the job of Attorney General, I was more comfortable fighting insurance companies, even though Hartford was the insurance capital of the world. And people were saying to me, you're really suing insurance companies? My colleagues, attorneys general? Aren't they based in Hartford, Connecticut? And I felt more comfortable. I was sure of my own judgment. I think that's what it comes down to. You all have been in jobs. If you're in a job for a while, you get better at it, or you're fired. And so far, I haven't been fired. I don't think this is wood. Knock on wood.
There's a lot more that we could talk about, but we got a chance to cover an awful lot. Senator Blumenthal, it was really good to see you. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
It was good to see you.
Busy day.
And on this topic of being in the job, I never forget how important it is to get around the state, to listen to people, because ultimately they're the ones who hire me, and they're going to make the judgment if they think I'm not doing the job as good as they like, as well as they like. And I'm just going to keep on doing it with conscience and conviction as my ultimate guide, listening to the folks who are here tonight and a lot of others in Connecticut. And I am so deeply grateful. I mean, I really mean grateful for this opportunity. It is a privilege. When I get up every day, again, I know this sounds trite, but it is true. When I wake up, I am so thankful for this opportunity. And thank you. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. Nice round of applause for Senator Blumenthal. I just have to say before I let you go, since you said that, when you wake up every morning, I've never seen you not wearing a suit ever once. Like, do you wake up in a suit? Like, what do you wear on the weekend when you're just kicking back with like a beer or whatever?
You should come around with me on the weekend because I don't wear a suit. I don't wear a suit. Who would wear a suit if you didn't have a choice? And, more and more people aren't wearing suits, but no, I don't wear a suit all the time.
Okay, you don't wear a suit all the time. Okay, that's good for me to know. Senator Richard Blumenthal, who occasionally kicks back. Great to see you once again.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the folks at UConn Stamford for helping us to coordinate this event. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Mohegan Tribe, Connecticut Business and Industry Association, Eversource, Clifton Larson Allen, the Causeway Agency, Express Strategies, Hinckley Allen, and Rowthorne Law, all the people who came to Stamford today. to be with us in person, and all the people who are watching at ctmirror.org/events. You can find out more about our future events, and of course, you can click on that donate button. Hope you can join us for our next installment of In the Room. It's Lieutenant Governor Susan Bleisowitz. It's Wednesday, November 20th at Mark Twain House and Museum. That's in Hartford. Information is coming up in the coming weeks on our In the Room events page. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Please have a good evening and drive home safe.
Thank you.
So good to see you.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, right?
I didn't get into too much trouble.
I think you're in pretty good shape.